I was made, that's not the right way to say it. I was convinced to become a Sabbath keeper when I was on staff, pardon me, at Canyon Ridge Christian Church here in Las Vegas. When Kevin Oder was our senior pastor, he was a big believer in Sabbath rest, and while he was getting his D-Min, his doctorate of ministry at Fuller, one of his professors was Dallas Willard, and if you're not familiar with Dallas Willard, he is worth getting familiar with. But the concept of Sabbath keeping is not a law for righteousness. It is an observance for health and balance. The Old Testament commanded Israelites that on the seventh day, on Saturday, from sundown on Friday night, in fact, until sundown on Saturday, this was to be the Sabbath. And among the 10 commandments is the command, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. And so the keeping of Sabbath was very important to the Jewish nation. And if you want to go back into the history of why this was so, in addition, the big reason it was so is because God had commanded it, okay? And part of the reason that it makes sense that this would be a command from God, pardon me, my voice, my allergies are doing some weird things, so what I'm sounding like is, it's kind of Barney Fifey. But after 400 years of slavery in Egypt, where there was no day off, every day was a work day for the Israelites held in captivity there. This was a law to provide them with a day of rest every week. Something they had not known at all while they'd been slaves in Egypt. And so it was never a commandment to put them under bondage to some difficult thing to do. It was a gift from God, a day devoted to rest and renewal. As a matter of fact, no work at all. Now, in case of an emergency, your child falls into the well, you get the child out. And if one of your sheep or cattle or donkeys or, okay, you take care of that, but you don't harvest. You don't, moms and wives didn't prepare food. That was all done on Friday and then was available for the Sabbath. But there was no meal prep, and very legalistic observers couldn't even light a fire. So they made certain that the fire from Friday night carried over through all day Saturday. And there was a lot of different nuances to that were basically additional, that rabbis in what was known as the Mishnah, so recording rabbis' views on an expansion upon the law. So when Jesus came along, there was interpretation on top of interpretation and writing on top of writing on top of writing about Sabbath keeping. And the Pharisees had taken it too extreme for themselves, and they demanded that everybody else observe it the way they did. So now we're back to where we were last time in Matthew chapter 12, and where the disciples and Jesus were walking through a grain field, and they picked some heads of grain, and they essentially sifted and thrashed them in their hands, and then they ate them. And the Pharisees said that's breaking the Sabbath. All right, verse 3. Jesus says, haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? You got to go back into the book of 1 Samuel to pick this up. David and his men he was fleeing from Saul is what it came down to, and he had a few men with him. They went to Abiathar the priest and said, what have you, I need something for my men. And Abiathar said, I don't have anything except this bread that's been on the show table, which in the tabernacle, and then later in the temple, there was this table that was daily, they replenished the bread, which is very symbolic of God's provision. Well, verse 4, he entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. See, only the priests could eat that bread. David did anyway, and he gave it to his men. Verse 5, or haven't you read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple desecrate the day and yet are innocent? And I thought about this. I thought about it often when I was in full-time church ministry. My heaviest work day was on Sunday, and when I first started thinking about this, I didn't have a Sabbath. I would take a day off whenever I could, and usually it meant I would go play golf with somebody. But I didn't really have a solid day off. Well, the priests at the temple, on the Sabbath day, they still slaughtered and butchered the animals that were to be laid on the altar of burnt offerings, and that was work, which would have violated the Sabbath. But Jesus points out they were innocent, even though that was desecrating the Sabbath day by virtue of the fact that they worked. I tell you that one greater than the temple is here, Jesus said. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And he connects this idea of Sabbath keeping and mercy. That's an interesting deal, because it might seem a little bit, where is that? It's kind of out of left field, right? Well, no, the Old Testament prophet Hosea had written that this phrase, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Well, here's how it's connected. The practice of Sabbath keeping, this strict legalistic keeping of the Sabbath, not just the observance of the Sabbath, but this legalistic, well, that was sacrifice. And the Pharisees, frankly, had no mercy. When they're dealing and their criticism of the disciples, it's evidence. There's no mercy there. And God said, of the two, mercy or sacrifice, mercy's supposed to win, not sacrifice. And I think maybe Jesus was giving it to him straight. You guys are all tied up with this sacrifice. Mercy is what God desires. And he said, if you had known what these words mean, then you would not have condemned the innocent. Well, in direct terms, that was the disciples that they were condemning, and Jesus. And then he goes on and he drops the bomb. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Okay. The Pharisees would never have just said, well, okay, if that's how it is. They would have resisted that like crazy. And this was one more thing about Jesus that got under their skin, is more evidence of the fact that he needed to be somehow eliminated. When Jesus said, the Son of Man, he was talking about himself, and he used that kind of, I don't know that it's the proper terminology, but the nickname Son of Man for himself all the time. Through the Gospels, you're going to see that over and over again. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Okay, so this turns upside down the idea that they were self-appointing themselves to be the judge, jury, and executioners. The Sabbath was not the Lord. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. The Sabbath doesn't rule. Jesus rules the Sabbath. All right, now, when he was in this confrontation with the Pharisees, that would have heckled them to no end. For us, what's the difference? Just going to toss this out. Observing the Sabbath is still a healthy thing to do. Now, are we bound and restricted to Saturday as the Sabbath? Well, if you want to be, you could. I don't think we necessarily are. I do believe, though, that one 24-hour period of time in a week when we don't produce anything is very, very healthy. And oh, by the way, very, very difficult. It's a day for renewal and a day for physical rest. Our culture kind of wants us to be 24/7 with our activity and our, push and push. Don't get left behind. It's a day to be left behind. And I think one of the big reasons why God chose the day of rest, he himself took Sabbath on the seventh day, created in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. For us, it's a reminder. You know what? You working 60, 70 hours a week, you're not holding the world together here, pal. Your rest is as important to God as your work is. Pretty hard to swallow for modern Christianity. Anyway, the way I was raised. Well, whatever was there for you. That's all I got. See you next time on So Care for Stevie Boy.